Hello Divination and welcome. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create unique hover overlaps for testimonials with Divi. This is the final result we're aiming to achieve. So without wasting a lot of time, let's dive in and let's get started. Okay, so let's get started by creating a brand new page. So I'm going to come over here to Pages, click on Add New. We're going to give this page a title. I'm just going to call mine Unique Hover Overlaps. Click on Use the Divi Builder. And then I'm going to go straight to the Visual Builder. Now here we are going to build our design from scratch. So I'm going to select this. And then we're going to go ahead and choose our column structure. So the column structure I'm going to go with is this one right here. Now before we add any modules, let's go ahead and set our sizing for our rows. So I'm going to come over here to my row settings. Click on Design, Sizing. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to make this row full width. So I'm going to click here. We're going to come to gutter width and we're going to set this to 1. Now the gutter width here is the distance between the columns. So we want to make sure there is no space between these columns. Right, so moving on, let's go to our spacing. So I'm going to come over here and scroll down a bit, click on spacing. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add a padding of 0 both to the top and the bottom. So I'm going to activate this chain, add my 0. Next, we're going to go to column 2 padding. So I'm going to start off here with the left padding. So we're going to set this to 2VW and we might as well go in and adjust our padding for the tablet and the smartphone. So I'm going to click this little icon here and then here for the tablet, I'm going to set this to 3VW. So for the padding right, we're also going to do the same. I'm going to set this to 3VW, both for the tablet and the phone. Great, so back over here to the desktop, our right padding on the desktop is going to be 11 VW, and then let's go ahead and save. Right, so what we need to do now is to add our image module to column 1. So I'm going to click this plus button here, search for my image module, select it. Now we need to add our image, so I'm going to click anywhere around this area here, and this takes me now into our media library. So this is where I get to choose my image. So you can just go ahead and use any portrait image. So in my example here, I'm going to go with this one. Click Upload an Image. Right, so next we need to adjust the email alignment. So we're going to come over here to Design, Alignment, and we're going to make sure that this image is aligned to the left. Now this option to always center image on mobile, we're going to say no to that. Now let's go to sizing. So I'm going to click here on sizing because we need to adjust our width. So we're going to start off with our main width here, which is set to 78%. And for the tablet and the phone, we're also going to adjust that and set it to 70. So I'm going to click here on this little icon, click on the tablet, set this to 70. And for the phone, we're also going to set it to 70. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is it's very important that we make our adjustments to the tablet and the phone views as well, because we want our website to look great in all 3 devices. Okay, so back over here to the desktop. Next, we're going to make sure that our module alignment as well is aligned left. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so for now, we are done. I'm going to go ahead and save. And now it's time to add our hover overlap text to column 1. So let's click this plus button here and add our text module. So I'm going to search for it and select it. So in here, we can start adding all our content. So we can give this lady here a name. So we're going to call this Samantha. And then we're going to say CEO of company X. And then I'm just going to give this company a name. So let's just call this Elegant Themes. Now let's go and add our background color. So I'm going to come over here to background. So the color we're going to add here has an RGBA value. So I'm going to click this plus button. And for us to enter our RGBA values, we need to drag this slider down until we get the RGBAs. So here we're going to paste my value like that. Now, if you want to use the exact same colors as I'm using throughout this tutorial, I will leave a link to this post in the show notes below. Right, so now that we've added our background color, now let's add our hover background. So I'm going to click this arrow here, click on hover, and then I'm going to add my hover color. So this time my color is going to be a normal hexadecimal value. So I'm going to drag the slider all the way up and then paste my value like that. Okay, so now we can see we have those two states. Now let's go to the text settings. So I'm going to click here on design, click on text. So the first thing we're going to do is to set our text color to white, text size to 0, and text line height to 0 as well. Now it's time to add our text hover state. So I'm going to come over here and start with the size. So I'm going to come over here to text size. I'm going to click this arrow here, click on the hover tab, and we're going to set our text size to 19. For our line height, we're going to set this to 2 EM. So the next thing I'm going to do is to give a title to the name. So I'm going to come back over here to content, click on text. I'm going to highlight the name Samantha, and then over here we're going to set this to heading 3. Okay, so let's add our heading text settings. So I'm going to come over here to design, select heading 3, and then I'm going to just make my text all uppercase, and I'm going to make the text white as well. So I'm going to select white. And for the text size, I'm going to set this to 0. And for the line height, 0 EM as well. Now, there's one more thing I need to do here, and that is to come over here to the font weight and set this to ultra bold. Right, so with that all set, the next stage now is to add our hover heading text settings. So we're going to start off with our text size. So I'm going to come over here, hover over this area, click this arrow. So I'm going to click this hover tab and then set my size to 35. And for my line height, I'm going to set this to 1.1. So now if I go between these two areas, you can see that the hover and the default now looks different. Okay, so the next stage now is to go to the spacing. So over here, we're going to add a top margin of minus 100 pixels. So I'm going to set that to minus 100. Left margin and right margin is going to be 50. So I'm just going to add my value once and then activate this chain. And then my top padding and bottom padding is going to be 40 for the top and 60 for the bottom. Now, as you can see, everything is all aligned to the left. So let's set our text orientation to centered. So I'm going to come back over here to text, scroll down, and then choose my orientation right here. So we're going to choose centered. Next, let's add a box shadow onto this. So I'm going to scroll down here, click on box shadow. So here, I'm going to choose this option here. And then I'm going to add my horizontal position and set this to 1000. For the vertical position, I'm going to set this to minus 400. The blur strength is going to be 0. And for the spread strength, I'm going to set this to 250. And then finally, we are going to add our color. And as I mentioned before, if you want to use the same colors as I'm using in this example, I will leave a link to the post in the description below. So over here on the color, I'm going to click this eyedropper tool and then paste my values between the brackets, and make sure you don't overwrite the brackets, because if you do that, then the color won't show over here. Now we're going to add our hover states onto our box shadow. So to do that, we're going to start with the box shadow horizontal position. So I'm going to click this arrow here, click on hover, and this time I am going to add a value of minus 73. So for our box shadow vertical position, I'm going to set this to minus 49. The blur strength is fine at 0. And for the box shadow spread strength, I'm going to set this to 10. And then finally, we are going to add our shadow color. So I'm going to click here and paste my value here. Now let's go to the advanced tab and add our transition. So I'm going to click here on the advanced tab, click on transitions. And what we're going to do here is we're going to set our duration to 1000 milliseconds. So we're done with this. So let's go ahead and save. The next stage now is to add a text module here. So I'm going to click this plus button, search for my text module. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to add some dummy text onto this. So it saves me from doing a lot of typing. Right, so I'm just going to replace all this content here like that. I'm going to paste my dummy text. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to heading 3. So I'm going to highlight all this and set it to heading 3. Now let's go and customize the heading text settings. So I'm going to come over here to design, heading text, click on heading 3. Now, if you've forgotten which heading it is you're working on, all you have to do is to come over here and highlight over this area and then click this brush. So that'll take you directly to whatever it is set to over here. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we are going to search for a font because we're now moving away from the default font that we have here. So I'm going to click here on this drop down. I'm going to search for my font and select it. Next, we are going to set our alignment. So I'm going to come over here, align to the left. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is to set our heading 3 text size. So we're going to set this to 3.5 VW. Now, while we're on this, we might as well set our different screen sizes. So I'm going to click this little icon here, click on the tablet, and I'm going to set this to 40. And then for the smartphone, we're going to set this to 30. Right, so back over here to the desktop, we're going to set our line height to 1.1. Right, so the next stage is to add a top margin. So I'm going to come over here to spacing, and for the top margin, I'm going to set this to 7 VW. So for the tablet, so I'm going to click here on this little icon, and then on the tablet, I'm going to set this to 100 pixels and 50 for the phone. So I think I might need to go back and adjust our text. So I'm just going to delete some of this. Right, so we are done with this. I'm going to save. Then next, we're going to add another text module. So this one here is going to have the actual testimonial. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, search for my text module, select it. And then in here, I'm going to paste my dummy text like that. So I'm going to click here on the design text. So the first thing I'm going to do is to set my line height to 2.2. The text orientation needs to be aligned to the left. So I'm going to select that. Now let's go to the spacing. So over here, I am going to add a top margin of 4 VW. And for the tablet and smartphone, I'm going to set this to 50. So I'm just going to come over here to the tab, set my 50. And this will, in fact, this needs to be 50 pixels. And then over here on the phone, that's going to be 50 pixels. Great. So that's looking much better now. So I'm going to save. The next stage is to add a new column structure. So I'm going to click this plus button, and the column structure I'm going to go with is this one right here. I'm going to select it and then just close for now. And then the styles I'm going to use here is going to be the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, copy row styles, and then I'm just going to paste them here. Now I'm going to go into my row settings, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by adding my top margin. So I'm going to click here on design, spacing. So for the top margin, I'm going to set this to 100. And for the top padding, I'm going to set this to 0. In fact, it's set to 0 already, and 0 to the bottom because these are the styles that we copied over from the top row. So all I have to do now is to set our left padding to 11 VW, and the right padding needs to be set to 2 VW. And then for the column 2 padding, I'm just going to delete that because we don't need anything in there. And then save. So the next stage now is to just clone these text modules and add them onto column 1. So let's go ahead and do that. So for this, I'm just going to use a shortcut, Command C. If you're on a Mac, if you're on a PC, it's Control C to copy. And then to paste, it's just Command V or Control V to paste. Right, so I'm going to do the same here. So all we have to do now is to go in and change our orientation to right. So I'm going to click here on my module settings, design, text, and then for my text orientation here, I'm going to set it to right. I'm going to save that and then do the same for this one. So click here on the settings, design, text, and my orientation needs to be set to right. Next, we're going to add an image to module 2. So I'm going to click here on this plus button and search for my image module, select it, and then I'm going to choose my image. So the image I'm going to go with is this one here. Upload an image, and then I need to make sure that this image is aligned to the right. So I'm going to click here on design, alignment, and align it to the right. Next, I'm going to come over here to the sizing. So the first thing I'm going to do is to change my width to 78%, And for the tablet and the phone, it's going to be 70. So I'm just going to do that quickly by coming over here to this tab, setting this to 70. Okay, so that's looking much better now. And for the module alignment, I'm going to make sure that this is set to right. Now let's go to the spacing to add some margins. So I'm going to come over here to spacing, click here on margin top, and we're going to set this to 50. So for now, I'm going to save, and then this is time now to add our content. So I'm going to start by adding my module. So I'm going to click this plus button, search for my text module. I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to add the name. All right, for this, I'm just going to say Henry, co-founder company X. And then I'm going to set Henry to heading 3. So as we did before, we're going to set our background color to full transparency. So I'm going to click here on background, click the plus button and add my color just like that between the brackets. I'm going to add a hover background color. So I'm going to click here on this little icon, click on the hover tab and add my color. And this time it's a solid color. So I'm going to drag this all the way up and paste my color. Right, so let's go to our default text settings. So I'm going to click here on design, text, and then I'm going to set my text color to white and the size to 0. The line height needs to be set to 0 as well. Orientation to center. Now let's go to the hover text settings. So I'm going to start here with the text size. So I'm going to click on this little icon, click on hover. So for the text size, we're going to set this to 19. The line height needs to be set to 2 EM. Now let's go to the headings. So this is going to adjust the settings for the name Henry. So I'm going to click here on heading text, heading 3, and then I'm going to choose ultra bold for the font weight. We're going to change the color to white. And then for this text size, we're going to set this to 0 and the line height to 0. Right, so with all that in place, now it's time to add our hover state. So I'm going to click here on this little icon. So for our hover color, making sure that the hover tab is selected. So for the color, we're going to make sure it's set to white. And the size needs to be set to 35. Okay, so for the line height, we're going to set this to 1.1. Now it's time to go to the spacing. So I'm going to scroll down here, click on spacing. So I'm going to start with the top margin, set that to -80. Left margin, we're going to set this to 50. And we're going to do the same for the right. So just to make this quick, I'm just going to activate this chain. So that value now is added to both sides. Right, so now it's time to add my top padding and bottom padding. So my top padding here is going to be set to 40 and my bottom padding to 60. Right, there's one thing that I forgot to do here on this text. We need to make it all caps. So you can just come over here and hover over this area and click this paintbrush tool. So that will take you back over here and set your style to all caps. Now it's time to add our text shadow. So I'm going to come over here to box shadow. We're going to select it. So the first value here we're going to add is the horizontal position. So we're going to set this to -1000. The vertical to -420, the blur strength to 0. And then over here for the spread strength, we're going to set that to 250. And then we're going to add our color. So I'm going to click here on the eyedropper tool and paste the color between the brackets. Now let's change these values on hover. So I'm going to start over here on horizontal position. So I'm going to click this little icon. Make sure that the hover tab is selected. I'm going to start with -73 and this needs to be set to -49. The spread strength here needs to be 10. And then I'm going to add my color. So I'm going to click here on this eyedropper tool and paste my color between the brackets, just like that. Now let's head over to the transitions and set our transition. So I'm going to click here on advanced, click on transitions. By default, it's set to 300. So we want this to be 1000. So I'm going to set this to 1000. Now let's do a preview and see what this looks like. So I'm going to click here on save and then we're going to publish this page. Exit the visual builder. Okay, so let's test this. So for this to work, we need to hover over this area here and now you can see the transition happening. And if I scroll down here, we can also see that happening over here as well. So there you have it. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and do follow us on our social media platforms. By doing so, you'll be notified every time we release new tutorials. Until next time, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.